Lynn's voice rasped, "I love you. I'm sorry." I wanted to tell her to rest, to save her strength, but she was gone. A month ago, cancer took my wife of 22 years from me. From us, rather, from me and the 3 children that she had given me, Jenny, our eldest at 18 years, Matt, my only son, 15 years old, and our baby, 13-year-old Paula. Lynn's death had been hard on all of us, but Matt and Paula took it hardest. I was, in some ways, well prepared for the grief. It was an old visitor come to darken my doorstep once again. My mother had died in a car crash when I was 7, and my father passed from a stress-related heart attack when I was in college. Lynn saw me through the latter, and something she told me made the pain easier on me. It was a quote with no certain provenance: "Grief is love with no place to go." I've heard variants of it, slight changes of words or rephrasings, but this was my favorite, the one that Lynn told me, and the one I passed down to our children. It was an unwanted but desperately needed heirloom that she could no longer give them herself. It helped them cope, both the words themselves and knowing that the phrase was one I'd learned from their mother. Matt found particular comfort in it. Apparently it was close to something that was said in one of his superhero TV shows. Whatever worked. The kids were going to see a grief counselor, as was I. That helped, too. But ultimately, only time could heal the wound, if it could be healed at all. I did my best to share but not overshare in their sadness. That was difficult to me, but that I was able to even attempt it was another gift from Lynn. My mother had been the parent in my life that was able to deal appropriately with emotions, and when she was gone, I was left with my father's stoic presence. He loved me, but he had difficulty showing it. He had difficulty showing any emotion. He cried at my mother's funeral, but that was it. He didn't try to stop me from grieving, but he also didn't guide me through it. My emotional development was stunted through my childhood, and it wasn't until I met and fell in love with Lynn that I learned how to express my feelings again. I was never as good at it as her. There are certain things you learn in childhood or not at all. But slowly, over the course of our courtship and marriage, I came out of my shell. She helped me grieve for my father in ways that he had never helped me grieve for my mother. She taught me how to show love openly, to not treat it as a weakness that could be exploited by others, but as a strength to fortify myself against the world. She was the one great love of my life. Her death was the greatest test of the lessons she had given me. Lynn was a very emotional woman, especially when we were younger. She came from a bohemian background, her father was a writer, and her mother was a painter. She was undisciplined until after our children were born. She leaned on me both as the primary provider and to take care of the day-to-day minutiae of our lives. But by the time Paula was 1, she became as solid and stable a partner as I could have asked for, trading in her somewhat passive attitude for a new proactive and disciplined one. She could still go off on flights of fancy at times, which I loved, but she became the solid, stable partner that the father of 3 young children needs. Her foresight was invaluable after her death. It was why we had large life insurance policies, even at our relatively young ages. It was why she had her funeral arrangements made ahead of time, so that I wouldn't have to deal with it while also trying to take care of our children and myself. And it was why Marcus Devereaux was standing on my stoop with a leather satchel in his hand. Mr. Devereaux had called me the day before. He told me that he was an attorney, and that Lynn had asked him to handle a specific bequest that wasn't covered by our will. He refused to give me additional details over the phone but asked to come by my home the following day at 1 o'clock. When asked why we couldn't meet at his or my office, he told me that the location and time were part of Lynn's instructions for him. He was a tall, slender black man with a shaved head and a graying beard. It was hard to pinpoint his age, but if I had to guess, he was perhaps 10 to 15 years older than my own 44 years. His well-tailored suit was worn without an overcoat, odd, given the cold weather, but not especially so. There was a kind, if slightly impersonal smile on his face as he held out his hand. "Mr. Jenkins?" He had a deeper voice than I expected from such a slim man, a rich baritone. "Kurt." I shook his hand. It was a good grip, firm without trying to play any stupid games. "Marcus Devereaux." "Marcus, if you prefer." "May I come inside?" I led him to our living room. Before I could offer him a seat and a drink, he said, "Which way is your dining room?" "I'm afraid your wife was quite specific in her instructions." I raised an eyebrow and he smiled again. I know, it sounds odd. But it's far from the most eccentric directive I've been given in my career. I shrugged and beckoned him to follow. Once there, I asked, "What is this about?" "Patience, please. I promise, we'll get to that soon." He looked around. "Do you have a small trash can? A waste paper basket, that type of thing?" "Sure. I'll go get it." When I returned from my home office, he bade me sit, then put the trash can to one side of me. Afterwards, he sat at the table opposite me, in the spot Lynn would normally have taken. "Kurt, could you tell me a little bit about Lynn? I only had a limited time with her, no more than a few hours. I'm sorry to say that she was in a great deal of pain, but she was very focused." "Can you tell me what she was like? As a person and as a mother?" "Lynn was wonderful. Funny, smart, loving. Great laugh." He was sympathetic as I smiled sadly. "I think I might miss that the most. The house has been so." I shook my head. Her parents were artistic types, and she had a lot of that energy. She was a little flighty when we were younger, but she got that out of her system once the kids came along. She was there for everything the kids needed by the time Paula was in school. Just a great mom, always had time for them. "And as a wife?" I felt an odd sensation, like a distant alarm was being sounded. "What is this about?" Marcus inclined his head. "Part of it is personal curiosity," as I said. "But part of it, well, it would be useful for me to know. I can't tell you more than that yet, but I assure you, telling me what you thought of her would be well in line with her wishes." This was uncomfortable. He was a stranger. And a lawyer. It felt almost like a trap, but at the same time, if it went along with Lynn's wishes. I shrugged. She was a great wife. The best. A loving, wonderful partner. I could talk with her about anything, and I think she felt the same about me. We had our troubles, like all couples do, but most of those sorted themselves out more than a decade ago. She was a rock when her diagnosis came. If I had been married to any other woman, I can't imagine that I would have gotten through it as well. I looked down at my hands. I'll miss her for the rest of my life. She was my life in a lot of ways. Thank you, Kurt. For my part, I can tell you that she loved you very much. She spoke of you in glowing terms. Even through the pain, I could tell. He shook his head. Perhaps we should get started. Marcus placed his satchel on the table and began to withdraw 4 objects from it: an envelope, a bottle of scotch, and a pair of tumblers. Each was of special interest to me. The envelope had my name on it in Lynn's swooping cursive handwriting, the scotch was an unopened Macallan 25-year sherry oak, a very expensive bottle, and the tumblers, while themselves rather plain and unexceptional, represented an ill omen. When Lynn had to give me bad news, we would sit like this. She'd wait until the early afternoon on a school day or the late evening on the weekend, times when the kids couldn't interrupt us. We'd sit in the positions Marcus and I now occupied at the table. She would bring out 2 tumblers and a bottle of scotch, then pour us each a finger. Once we'd finished them, she'd pour another that wasn't to be touched until she'd finished with whatever she'd needed to say. It was a ritual that she learned early in our marriage to help manage the pain I felt with particularly bad news. She had taught me how to deal with my emotions, as I mentioned before, but particularly strong ones could still leave me unable to cope with their intensity. When she lost her mother, this was how she'd broken the news. When she was fired from her job, this was how she'd broken the news. And when she learned that she had previously undiagnosed stage 4 cancer, this was how she'd broken the news. The ritual was painful, but it gave a familiar shape to the pain, rather than leaving it free and uncontrolled. He poured each of us a finger and passed me my glass. I sipped at it. This was a fine scotch, and drinking it quickly was sacrilege. Sipping also gave me time to think. Marcus, why are you here? His voice was even. Your wife retained me to do what we are doing right now. I can't give you more detail until after we've completed the initial set of instructions. Can you tell me how you were hired? I've never heard of you before yesterday. Marcus considered his next words carefully. Your wife consulted with a number of attorneys to find one that she felt was well qualified for the task that she needed to see accomplished. But, again, I can't give you specifics about what qualities she required until after we've completed the initial set of instructions. And I assume that the instructions are, roughly, to have this very fine scotch and then. Do I read the letter? Do you? You do. Have you read it? He nodded. I helped her prepare it personally. No other person was involved. I took a deep breath and finished the rest of the Macallan in my glass, then held out my hand for the letter. He instead took up the bottle again and leaned across the table to pour another finger in my glass. That deep voice intoned, "Drink." My brows furrowed. No, that's wrong. Lynn would pour me one drink, I'd finish that, and then I'd drink the second one after she'd given me her news. His voice was steady, with just a hint of regret. Mr. Jenkins. Kurt. I am the only living person that knows what is in that envelope. And I am telling you, drink the second one now, before you read it. I swallowed without moving the glass to my lips. Marcus, what is? Drink. His voice changed, sympathetic but firm. Please, Kurt. You do not know me, and you have no reason to trust me, but man to man? Drink. I shouldn't have just tossed it back, like I said, a sacrilege. But my ritual had already been profaned, so what was an expensive glass of scotch in the grand scheme of things? He held his hand out for the tumbler, then gave me the envelope. As I opened it, he poured another finger into my glass, but kept it on his side of the table. I raised an eyebrow. If I give it back to you now, you'll drink it before you're even halfway through. I pulled a letter from the envelope. It was long, multiple pages of typewritten text. I leafed through it quickly, not reading, and the only handwriting was Lynn's signature on the last page. Returning to the first, I began to read to myself. My dearest love. This is the hardest letter I've ever had to write. I love you so, and I know that you love me, too. I am sure that you are in so much pain right now, that is why I had Mr. Devereaux deliver this a month after my death, so that you didn't have to deal with what you will read here while still deep in your initial grief. It may seem cruel to space things out in this way, but I promise you, I am doing it this way only because I love you and the children. I must repeat this, I love you. You are the greatest love of my life. I wish that things could have been different. I wanted us to spend our golden years together traveling and playing with our grandchildren. The greatest regret of my life is not my death, it is only that my death will leave you alone for so long. I hope that you will find someone to share the rest of your life with you. I hope, even, that you will find the greatest love of your life after I am gone, that what we had together pales in comparison to the love that sustains you to the end of your years. I must repeat that I love you, because what will come next is so hard. Because it will make you doubt my words. It will make you doubt my love. That is a greater pain to me than any cancer, any tumor or radiation or chemotherapy. But I know you, my love. And I know how you will feel when you have read this letter. I am so sorry to do this to you, but please, don't doubt that I love you more than any man I've ever loved. I could not have hoped for a better husband. The words in this letter are meant to explain my behavior and how they will affect your life going forward. They are not meant to excuse, I have no excuses and no justifications for what I have done. They are not made in an attempt to earn forgiveness, I am beyond the succor of your forgiveness. But they are meant to allow you to make sense of the cruel hand that fate has dealt you. If I could take this burden from you, I would do anything. But I cannot, I can only tell you what I've done and hope that you can someday recover from the damage that the truth will inflict upon you. Kurt, the simple truth is this, you are the greatest love of my life, but you are not the only man that I've loved during our marriage. I reread the line several times to make sure I'd seen it right. Kurt, the simple truth is this, you are the greatest love of my life, but you are not the only man that I've loved during our marriage. You are the greatest love of my life, but you are not the only man that I've loved during our marriage. You are not the only man that I've loved during our marriage. I blinked and looked up at Marcus' face. He nodded, his lips a tight line. I glanced at the tumbler just out of reach, he had been right. With a sigh he said, I'm sorry, Kurt. It gets worse. I opened my mouth to speak and he simply nodded to the letter. We hadn't completed the initial set of instructions. I write those words with the greatest of shame. Please, I need you to understand, you did nothing wrong. You are blameless in my infidelity, even though I convinced myself otherwise at the time. You are, as I wrote before, the best husband I could have asked for. You were an excellent lover, a bountiful provider, and a wonderful father. You are not the reason I strayed. I am. I strayed because I was weak and prideful and foolish. I strayed because I needed something that I thought you couldn't provide, when in fact, I didn't ask you to. I thought I knew the limits of your love, but they were instead the limits of mine. I will provide detail that you would perhaps wish that I hadn't. I provide it because Mr. Devereaux convinced me that it would be crueler to not do so. I am not attempting to flaunt my infidelities, as I said, they are a source of shame for me. But I am dead and my shame no longer matters. Only your ability to move past them and make our children safe matters. I looked up at Devereaux. Make our children safe? What the fuck does that mean? What the fuck is this, you asshole? Did you son of a bitch, did you fuck my wife? He shook his head. No, Kurt. Her affair ended long before I met her. And you can call me any name you want. I assure you, you are not wrong in any of them. But the insight you need, the bulk of it, will come only if you continue reading. Muttering threats and insults, I looked back to the hated letter. My fall came after Jennifer was born, but its seeds were planted in the earliest days of our relationship. I was intrigued with you from the beginning, then infatuated. You were so quiet and closed off. But you were also stable and intelligent. My parents were intelligent, but not stable. They were free to the point of foolishness. I loved them, but there's a reason I fell for you. I needed a counterpoint to the life I'd had before. I needed a man that could make me feel safe and cared for. I did not expect you to love me. I was not certain if you were capable of it at first. But as I got to know you, as you told me of your mother's death and your childhood, as I understood you better, I began to fall in love with you. You were so like you described your father to me, a man capable of love, but almost incapable of displaying it. But then he passed, suddenly and unexpectedly, and you grieved. I helped you through it, and somewhere in there, in that display of sorrow, a floodgate opened. The love that you held inside washed over me as I comforted you. I knew that you would provide not only stability for me, but also love. And I wanted to believe that my love, and the way that you were able to love me, would make you a better man, a stronger one. I still believe that. I only wish that it had made me a better woman. My ego in those days was quite inflated, I'm sure you remember. You were not the only man that had been interested in me, but I knew that I was the first woman that you were ever truly emotionally intimate with. Not physically, of course, but the first woman that you loved. That made me feel powerful. It was a power that I wanted to wield well, in service to our happiness, but feelings of power breed arrogance, even if they never fully manifest into outward action. We were married. Our early marriage was wonderful, we both worked, but we also both knew that it was with an eye towards you building a business so that I could someday stop working and raise our children. You worked long hours, and I began to miss you dearly. Your love, once unleashed, was like the sun, and I missed basking in its glory. I did not cheat on you, that was the farthest thing from my mind. Instead, if you'll remember, I missed a few of my birth control pills. But I have to confess now, I didn't miss them. I simply didn't take them. That was the first lie that I told you. I was foolish. I thought that if we had a child, you would be around more often, instead of working harder at securing our future. I thought that, even if you weren't, a child's love could sustain me until you could shine for me again. I didn't consider the difficulty that having a child would bring, the way it would drain me. I had been warned, of course, by our friends who had children of their own, but I didn't heed them. You provided stability to my life, and surely that would be enough. Even if it wasn't, I had grown used to the ways that a beautiful woman with a sharp mind could sometimes avoid responsibilities as though she were dancing between raindrops. Neither of these things saved me, though. Jennifer was a beautiful child. I don't regret that we had her at all. But it quickly became apparent how wrong I had been. You provided stability, but it was at the cost of more time away while I recovered. When you were with us, your sun shone on our daughter, and I felt left in the shade. I know you did not mean this, and I should have expected it. It's not as though you neglected me. You still showed me the love that you could when we were alone together, but that time was limited. Then, the second blow to our happiness happened. My mother died just before Jennifer turned 1. I was inconsolable, as you remember. We weren't close by the end, the two of you never got along, and she thought a businessman was a bad fit for me. But I still loved her, and the pain was almost overpowering. You tried to comfort me, but her death didn't mean that you had miraculously more time or energy available to help me. You did what you could, but why? Oh, you weren't much better at dealing with grief by then than you were when your father died. I struggled largely by myself. Work got worse for me, because I got worse. There was a rain cloud hovering over me, and I couldn't get out from under it. Looking back, I wonder now if I had postpartum depression. It might help to further explain my mood and behavior, but it still would not excuse it. After my mother's death, I was useless, and then I was fired. This did not happen when you think it did. That was the second lie. With Jennifer's daycare paid up for almost a month, I took the time to try to recenter. I visited museums and galleries, trying to reconnect with the memory of my mother, and with the young, beautiful woman that I used to be, the one that could dance between raindrops. And that's where I met Jeremy. Jeremy? Who the fuck was Jeremy? I racked my brain, trying to think if I'd ever met the man, ever heard his name. I came up with nothing. He was a little older than us, only a year or two. He was a handsome man, but that's not what drew me to him. It was the way he was looking at the same art that I was, like he was searching for something at the same time and in the same places. I found myself in 3 different galleries with him before he introduced himself. He was an artist, like my mother. And he was lost, like myself. Jeremy was the last scion of a wealthy family, the black sheep before he was alone. He had expected to inherit little, but his parents and older brother had been killed in a private plane crash earlier that year. When that happened, he was suddenly thrust into a situation he was completely unprepared for. He had his own small house and had been receiving an allowance, but he now had to contend with the wealth of generations, along with the men who had been hired to help him manage it. He wanted nothing to do with the money or the mansion. He had rejected it for a reason, albeit rejecting it in a way that let him be an artist without starving. Jeremy was aware of the hypocrisy, but now he wanted to give as much of his family's wealth away as possible. Unfortunately, the people managing it were standing in his way, because their careers rested on their fees, and those fees were commensurate with the amount of wealth generated. I didn't learn this at first. We simply met and talked about art. But I told him about my problems, and he told me about his. I didn't have a solution for his larger issue, but I recognized the core problem. He was an artist, and he thought like one. It made him unable to effectively deal with a lot of the real world. Most artists muddle their way through. The realities of everyday life can be very instructive. But he was also raised wealthy without having absorbed any knowledge of what was necessary to simply survive in the real world, without access to maids, valets, assistants, and the other servants he'd grown up with. Part of why I so valued the stability that you gave me, Kurt, was that I had to be an adult when I was a child. Bills sometimes would go unpaid if I didn't take care of it. My parents would fail to go to the doctor or miss other important appointments. I was, in essence, their personal assistant by the time I was 12. I was freed from that responsibility when I was 18 and leaned into my newfound freedom during my college years. It wasn't until I met you that I realized that I could have freedom and stability, that you could supply me with the latter while I taught you how to be free to feel. Jeremy presented the opposite issue. He could feel only too well, but he was unable to take care of himself. He needed someone to provide stability for him. So, slowly, I talked with him about how to organize his household, the directions he should look in for different people to manage his money, ways to set up systems that would let him meet his responsibilities without letting them overwhelm him. He insisted that I be paid. I told him my previous salary and he balked at that, instead giving me twice my pay under the table. That was the first year that I did our taxes instead of you. Working with Jeremy made me flex long-forgotten muscles, and I learned the simple joy that could be found in responsibility, in making sure that things got done without needing outside help. I had confused the overwhelming feelings of a teenager trying to manage the household of two irresponsible parents with the way it might feel to take care of myself and my family. That was partly why I took over that duty. The other was that I wasn't ready to tell you about him yet. Not because I was ashamed per se, I was ashamed that I'd been fired, and that I had waited so long to tell you. The longer I waited, the greater that shame became. And then I'd have to explain how we were still able to stay afloat financially, which meant you'd know I'd hid something else from you, and it turned into a shame spiral. There was no good way out except to come clean, which I just couldn't bring myself to do. I took over balancing our checkbook then as well, if you'll remember. Jeremy paid me in cash, so I made deposits into our account for the proper amount from my old job. Then I told you I got a raise and added some more. It took a lot of the edge off our situation, and it freed you up a little to give more time and affection to both me and Jennifer. The means were wrong, but the ends were well worth it. We were all happy. And Jeremy was happy as well. I'm fairly certain that he was what's called neurodivergent these days. He had ADHD or autism or both, albeit undiagnosed. He could make beautiful kinetic sculptures, but he couldn't keep his house clean. He could remember minute trivia about things that he loved, but not what day he was supposed to pay his bills. On the flip side, when his house was clean, he could focus better. I got a maid in for him, and his productivity shot up. I helped him organize and stick to his schedule, and he became happier. I was his personal assistant without a title, and it was the best I'd ever felt about a job. We became closer, not yet in any physical way, but an emotional attachment was forged. He helped me get through both my mother's death and my resentment towards her, which, I'm sorry to say, you simply weren't equipped to do at the time. You were a loving man, but that love didn't translate into the emotional depth necessary for such a complex task. I helped him deal with his contentious relationship with his deceased family as well. That was easier. Being an outcast for so long left him with few warm feelings for them, and he despised their wealth and the way they used it to crush others. I started to stay late some nights to help him scope out a new project he wanted to work on, or to spitball ideas with him. I inherited no artistic talent from my parents, but I understood the logistics involved better than anyone else he knew. I could tell him what was and was not likely to work from a purely physical standpoint and gave him accurate estimates of how long a project would take. As we grew closer, I grew more accurate in these estimates. Eventually, our relationship became physical. It wasn't due to any blow-up between you and I, we were doing as well as ever at that point. It wasn't spurred by any big event in his life, either. We were simply working late one night, and he kissed me. It was unexpected, but I knew that my friendship had blossomed into love before this. I felt guilt for breaking my vows to you, but a physical relationship was simply an expression of the love I had for him. He was already a secret from you, and perhaps that made it easier to cross the lines that blurred employer and friend and lover. I told myself I wasn't taking anything away from you. That was a lie, of course. I felt that I was owed this, that I supported two men in different ways, and raised the children of one of them. It was prideful and selfish, but it was what I allowed myself to think. I worked late and on the weekends sometimes, spending time mostly doing my job, but sometimes with Jeremy in a more intimate sense. I wanted to believe. I looked down at the wastebasket next to me, finally understanding why it was there. Marcus hadn't put it beside me for the envelope or letter. My stomach lurched, and I took deep breaths to steady myself. Lynn, the love of my life, mother to my children, had cheated on me. Not just once, but many times, over the course of what sounded like years. I tried to force my gorge back down. Marcus looked on in sympathy. He knew there was nothing he could do to ease what I was feeling, even if I had completed the initial set of instructions. I still wasn't completely sure why he was here, but I was beginning to suspect it was at least partially to keep me from doing something stupid. Good fucking luck with that. I was going to murder this Jeremy asshole, and some 60-year-old lawyer wasn't going to slow me down. The world slowly stopped spinning. I returned to the letter, hoping that the worst was over, but knowing that it probably wasn't. That was a lie, of course. I felt that I was owed this, that I supported two men in different ways, and raised the children of one of them. It was prideful and selfish, but it was what I allowed myself to think. I worked late and on the weekends sometimes, spending time mostly doing my job, but sometimes with Jeremy in a more intimate sense. I wanted to believe that what I was doing was good for all of us. Jeremy got the help and love he had been missing. I was able to relearn the skills and attitude to be a better partner for you, and you felt less pressure both to help me cope with my issues and to provide for the family. That's what I told myself to stave off the guilt that I knew I should feel more acutely. I know that you will have many questions, but I will not answer any relating to sex with Jeremy. I will not offer details about my time with him. There is no way to do so that will act. Yulie help you. I will merely say this: if I had to pick a lover for the rest of my life, it would be you, every single time, without any doubt in my mind. You are the best lover I have ever had. What I had with Jeremy was merely a way for us to feel closer to each other. Over the next 5 years. Jesus fuck. 5 years. 5. I stood unsteadily. What? Why did you? I started to rage. I fucking loved her. Why did you? I wanted to grab that smarmy fuck by the lapels and shake him until his head fell off. I was going to be sick, but I wasn't going to give this sadist the satisfaction of vomiting into a fucking wastebasket. He started to stand, but a glare from me told him what a bad idea that would be. I staggered to the nearby guest bathroom and emptied my stomach into the toilet, then flushed my lunch and a couple $100 of whiskey down the drain. Tears were running down my face, both from the vomiting and because my heart was being broken in a new and awful way. I thought that after the last month, I had run out of tears to cry. I was wrong. After washing my face and rinsing my mouth out for about 10 minutes, I took a deep breath and went back to face my tormentor. He was still in the same place, an unhappy look on his face. I stood behind my chair, bracing myself with my hands on the top of the backrest. Why? He opened his mouth to speak and I interrupted. If you say a fucking thing about your instructions, I'm going to call 911. I could almost hear his teeth grind together. Kurt, this is far from the first time that I've been threatened. But he looked to one side. It is, perhaps, the first time I've felt it was justified. I want to answer your questions, believe me. But I can't yet. It does have to do with the instructions, but that's because only after you read the letter will I be able to give you the answers you seek with the context they require. I snorted, Jesus. Fucking lawyers. What the fuck does that even mean? Devereaux sighed. How far into the letter have you gotten? Well, I just found out my wife fucked some rich asshole artist for 5 years, so how far is that? Ignoring my question, he riposted with one of his own. If I had asked you how well your wife knew Jeremy before you read that letter, what would you have said? My fingers tensed on the back of the chair. I wanted to snap it off and shove it down his throat. He watched me for a moment, sympathetic but perhaps a little superior, then said, I am not your enemy here, Kurt. I understand why you think I am. I promise you, I want only what is in you and your family's best interests. That's why I'm telling you to read the whole letter before asking any more questions. Standing up straight, I snapped, I'm going to get some air. He nodded. The afternoon was cold and crisp as I stepped outside. I had left my jacket inside, needing to feel the breeze on my skin. I was sweating, and my face was still damp from my earlier ablutions. Leaning over the railing of my front porch, I stared off into the middle distance and tried to get some control over myself. I wished I'd never met Marcus fucking Devereaux. I wished my wife had died before she could have sent for him, killed in a car crash or sudden organ failure brought on by her cancer. I could have had the illusion that I was loved, but having had that illusion stolen from me, my only chance at peace was to go back in and read that goddamned letter. I hated her, truly hated her for the first time in my life. Resolute, I returned to my dining room and chair without even a glance at Devereaux. Over the next 5 years, I truly became your partner in our household. I was able to contribute financially and emotionally. I was a better mother and wife as I shouldered more of the burdens of our day-to-day life. Your stress levels dropped, and both our sex life and our quiet times together improved as I became the wife you deserved. I feel great shame in admitting these things. I should have always been this for you. Failing that, I should have found a way to rediscover myself without going outside the bounds of our marriage. But I didn't. I cannot say that I regret my time with Jeremy, because I do not think I would have managed to be who I needed to be without that time. I sincerely believe that our marriage would not have survived, because I would have grown to resent you for my own weaknesses. That may sound foolish, but I was a fool. My affair with Jeremy had two endings. The first was after Matt was born. I wanted to rededicate myself to our family and marriage. Jeremy was unhappy, but he understood. This may sound unlikely, but he always respected you. I know that some affair partners deride the spouse, but there was none of that with him. He knew you were my first and greatest love, and he knew that he was stealing my time from you, even if I wouldn't admit it to myself until later. I spoke of you in glowing terms to him, and he was glad to hear about you and our family. He encouraged me to do what was best for us. He loved me enough to let me go when it was time. I helped him locate a new personal assistant, a young man named Alan. He was probably more competent in his way than I was, with a background in finance. I know that he was able to help Jeremy sort out the financial tangle of his family's fortune far better than I was. Jeremy and I stayed in touch, but at a distance. I didn't want to risk you finding out about my affair after it was already over, so we talked only rarely. By that time, your business had taken off, so I told you, finally, that I had been fired. We could afford to have me stay at home and watch the children. I did that for the next 2 years, until I heard from Jeremy that he needed my help once more. At first, I was going to turn down his request. I still cared for him, but I wouldn't further jeopardize our marriage. Then he told me that he had cancer. My world was suddenly turned upside down. I still loved him, albeit in a much more muted sense. If he had only ever been my friend, I would have helped him, but he had been my lover as well, and the man that helped me become the woman I needed to be. I couldn't deny that request. That's when I asked you to let me put the kids in daycare for 3 days a week. Matt was about a year old then. I told you that I wanted to help out at a charity. This was not entirely a lie. Alan had helped Jeremy funnel money into a charity to fund grants for needy artists. But mostly I was there to help Jeremy through the last of his days. The cancer had been caught too late, and he was dying. There were treatments, but their chance of success was so low and his quality of life would have been so poor that he chose to forego them. I was mostly his friend and caregiver, but he wanted to make love a few times. I couldn't deny him. It was something that would ease his pain and let him know that we would be loved and remembered after he was gone. He managed to survive 6 months, but the last 2 were in hospice. I saw him only a few times, but I was there when he died. He held my hand and told me that I was the love of his life. He knew that he was not the love of mine, and I didn't lie to him. But I did let him know that I loved him and would miss him. Then he closed his eyes. Less than an hour later, he was gone. You may remember that I had a difficult time in my second trimester with Paula. I was moody and angry at times, lashing out at you. I am sorry for that. You treated me like a queen, as you always did. I let you believe that it was hormones, and part of it probably was, but I was mostly mourning the death of my friend and had no one I could share my grief with. I am sorry. I am sorry for so many things. I had no other lovers before or after him. Everything in my life outside of that period was an open book to you. I lied at times to conceal what I had done during those years, but only about that. After Jeremy's death, and even in the years between my 2 affairs with him, I was dedicated solely to you and our family. This is, I am sure, of little comfort. I should have been faithful throughout those years as well. But I was not. I regret that I have hurt you by telling you this. I was prepared to take this secret to my grave. My reasons were both selfless and selfish. You deserve only happiness. I have no doubt that, had I lived to be 100, I would not have strayed again. If I told you of my infidelity, I know you would divorce me, and you would have every right to. But it would not make you happy. I don't know that you would have ever been able to trust or love again. I don't know that you will after reading this. And I loved you. To the end of my life, I loved you. What I did in the past does not sound like the actions of a loving spouse, but at the time I convinced myself that it was. It was not, and I am sorry. But just as I couldn't stand hurting you, I couldn't stand losing you, so I never told you. I would never have told you, had it not been for two things. The first is that the type of cancer that claimed Jeremy's life is the same that I have. It is not a common type of cancer but also not rare, so this is not too much of a surprise. But it has a genetic component, a vulnerability that comes about due to an abnormality. Having a copy of the gene from one parent makes it slightly more likely that a person will fall prey to it. Having copies from both parents significantly increases the chances, and also makes onset in young adulthood much more common. I do not know if Jeremy had one or both copies of the gene. I expect he did, both because he died so young and because his family tree included a number of early deaths by afflictions that sound like cancer. I know that I carry one copy. I know that I have hurt you so badly with this confession. I am afraid that what comes next will hurt most of all. There is a high chance that Matt is not your biological son, and a small but non-negligible chance that Paula is not your biological daughter. And if they both carry these genes, they are at significant risk of an early death. I motioned to Devereaux. Drink. He didn't move. My voice thundered, give me the fucking drink, you goddamn shyster. He slid the tumbler across the table to me, and I knocked it back. I have no excuse for what I have done. I loved you and Jeremy both. The two of you look very similar, as you've joked with me in the past. I have a definite type. There was no real chance of you finding out. I knew that I was his only lover, as I was your only lover, so disease was not a factor. I am sorry for what I did, but that can only go so far, and I am certain that I am far past the point where those words mean anything to you. Our children are in danger. I know you will do the right thing. I would have, but I only had so much strength, and I had no way of explaining to you and them why I would want to have them tested for the dominant version of the abnormality. If I had simply asked you to do it, you would have discovered my infidelity with no explanation at a time when I was too weak to talk with you, and you were in too much pain to shoulder yet another tragedy. So I must do what I did at the beginning of our marriage, and ask you to be the strong one. There is another factor as well, but it is a financial matter. It is part of why I retained Mr. Devereaux for his help in delivering this letter to you. I handpicked him not simply for his expertise in the pertinent laws, but also because of his life experience. I believe that he can help you come to the right decisions for yourself and our family. I will not presume to say what those are, because I have lost any right to claim that I am a worthy partner in your life. I cannot say how much I wish I had not done the things I did. I can only say that, for all my faults, I do love you. You are the greatest love of my life. You are the strongest man I know, with the greatest capacity for love I have ever seen. Please, take that capacity and turn it first towards our children and then, if you can, to finding a new partner, one that truly is worthy of you. I know that I have broken your heart with this letter. I hope that I have not broken it beyond the ability of a better woman to repair. In unending love and eternal regret. Lynn. I gestured with the tumbler and Devereaux poured another finger. Another, more irritated gesture brought another finger. We both sipped in silence. What's the financial issue? It was a question phrased as a statement, dull and without effect. After Mr. Stein Jeremy's death, he donated most of his fortune, but he put a significant sum into an offshore account. He slid a piece of paper across the table to me. There were a lot of zeros on it. Lynn was given access to it, but never withdrew any money. She told me that she felt your family was doing well enough without it, and that she couldn't come up with a way to explain the sudden windfall. The latter is no longer an issue, so she wanted you to consider. Fuck no. To consider the benefit it could give to your family. If you want no part of it, then it could still go to your children in the form of a trust, college funds. With a snort, I spat, yeah, my children. I took another drink. Fucking bitch. We sat quietly for a few moments, then he said, you raised them, yes? Drove them to school, took care of them while they were sick, fussed over them? I don't know you, Kurt. But Lynn did. She was certain that, even if it turned out that one or both of your two youngest weren't your biological children, that you'd still consider yourself their father. She was right. Why the fuck should I care about his kids? I grumbled. Fuck. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Yes, goddammit. They're my kids. She's taken damn near everything else from me in the time it took me to read that fucking letter. She doesn't get to take them, too. Marcus leaned forward slightly, a conciliatory tone in his voice. Kurt, you have a lot of decisions to make. More than you might immediately think. Lynn asked me to be here to help you work through all of the angles and come up with the decision that you believe will work best for you. Bullshit. That I'm here to help you, or that Lynn wanted you to make a decision that was good for you? I cocked my head. Definitely the latter. She clearly didn't give a fuck about me. And that means that if she sent you, it was in service to what she wanted, not what was best for me. So the former, too. Devereaux sighed. She did love you. You don't know me. I understand that. But I asked you some questions before you read the letter. What did you say when I asked how she was as a wife? A great wife. The best. She. Yeah, before I found out she fucked another guy for half a fucking decade. Jesus, what do you want me to say? Oh, it was 12 years ago, it's all water under the bridge? Or maybe, well, I don't want to speak ill of the dead? Fuck that. I paused, finding it hard to speak the words. She can burn in hell for all I care. That irritatingly even voice came out again. I understa. No you fucking don't, asshole. My wife cheated on me. She did it for 5 years. You're sitting there like some kind of fucking Easter Island statue in a 3-piece suit because you're getting paid to calm me down. I'm not going to calm down. Devereaux nodded slowly. You asked earlier why your wife hired me, and I told you that I couldn't divulge my qualifications until after you read the letter. Your wife was looking for someone with specific legal experience. That was the easiest fit. I could think of a dozen more qualified lawyers than me when it came to that, in fact. But then she wanted to know more personal things. She didn't disclose why except to me, although I think for one or two that she talked to before me, they could put some of it together if they tried. She wanted someone who could be fair and impartial. I've served as a temporary judge before. It's a task that gives lawyers a chance to see if they want to go for the brass ring before fully committing. I decided that wasn't for me. She wanted someone who had personal experience with infidelity. Someone whose life had been directly affected by it. I glanced at his left hand, and there was no ring there. He nodded. I fit the bill there as well. Finally, Lynn wanted someone who would zealously advocate for their client. That's not hard, it's part of the job description. But she ran me through a number of scenarios, especially ones involving family law, and asked me which side I'd prefer to advocate for. Taken as an aggregate, they make up the bulk of your situation. I scoffed. So, what, because you got her pop quiz right, because you said you'd side with her, you got the job? Whoop-de-fucking-do. No. I sided with the husband. She wanted someone who would be on your side, to make sure you got the best advice for your situation. I told her, after hearing her full story, that there were things I'd advocate for that she might not like, and her response was simple: whatever is best for Kurt and my children. I considered. He was a lawyer. That made him suspect to begin with. He had been hired by my wife. Technically, she was the client, not me. He could be lying for her, or for himself. There were a lot of zeros on that piece of paper. But Lynn was right, I didn't actually need that money. I didn't even want it, the way I felt right then. He made one more point as he saw me weighing my options. There's one more thing to consider. Until 10 minutes ago, I was the only person alive who knew what was in that envelope. If you want other counsel, you'll need to expand that pool. And you know what they say about a secret. 3 can keep it if 2 are dead. Yeah. I scowled at him. Fine. You're here. Let's talk. You have a number of important decisions to make. It's already 3, and I believe you have to pick your children up by 6? I nodded. All right. Let's assume that not all of these decisions will be made today. You'll want to sleep on some of them, I'm certain. But let's make sure that you understand the lay of the land. Fair? Taking my silence as assent, he moved on. 1. No reason to think that anyone outside of you, me, and possibly Alan knows of Lynn's infidelity. There's no reason to think that Alan cares, he's happy running the charity that he and Jeremy set up. So, Lynn's infidelity can remain a secret if you choose. 2. You agree that your children are your children, regardless of whether they share DNA with you, yes? I nodded reluctantly. 3. Your children's lives may be in danger. They will require genetic testing to know if that's the case or not. 4. There is a large amount of money sitting in an offshore account. I can make that available to you in a variety of ways if you choose, all perfectly legal and clean, without divulging how you came to acquire it. You'll have to pay a varying level of taxes on it, but... He shrugged. 5. Lynn and Jeremy are both dead. Jeremy has no estate anymore, having donated all of his money to charities and friends. Even if he did, it's been over a decade since Lynn cheated, and there's scant proof of it. I took a sip of the scotch. That seems to be about the shape of it. Let's put the money aside for the moment, then. It sat in an offshore account for 12 years, it can wait a few more weeks. The more immediate issue is your children. But to help you decide what you want to do there, I need to ask you to be honest about some things that you're going to have some very strong emotional reactions about right now. With a snort and another sip, I said, "Gee, you think?" I shook my head. Being combative wasn't going to help, even if it came naturally at the moment. Fine. Ask. The questions I asked about Lynn earlier, about what she was like as a person, a wife, and a mother. He raised a hand. I know you're rethinking them right now. But if I had never darkened your doorstep, you would still think those things. Do your kids think them as well? Or at least things that are similar, just from a child's point of view? I contemplated his question. Jenny and Lynn had gotten into it occasionally, but that was teenage stuff, the same as when Matt and I got into it. And seeing how they grieved her, I begrudgingly said, yeah. Yes. She was at least a good mom to them, in their eyes. And... fuck. And I suppose mine as well. I'd retroactively divorce her cheating ass if I could, but I probably wouldn't have fought her on shared custody, even knowing how she betrayed me. She was a good mom. Marcus quietly asked, "Do you want to change that? Do you think your kids would be better or worse off if they knew what she did?" There was a big picture window in the dining room. Lynn had loved to have the natural light in the room. I was irritated by it a lot of the time. It could be pretty, but it could also be overpowering. The afternoon sun only illuminated part of the room. Marcus was draped in shadow. I felt like I was in an interrogation room, and there were no right answers to any of the questions. I don't know. He steepled his fingers. I think you do. If the kids know, what will that do to them? Will they hate her? What will that gain them? What will it gain you? Right now, only we two know the secret. Do you gain anything by having it known that your wife cheated on you for years? I felt my temperature rising. It's not right. She shouldn't get away with it. The old lawyer looked straight at me. She's dead, Kurt. She died a slow, painful death, knowing that she'd have to disclose her infidelity. Knowing that the man that she claims is her greatest love will hate her. Does it seem like she got away with it to you? I looked into my glass. Sort of. Yeah, it sort of does. I am never gonna get my pound of flesh. Never going to get to rail away at her, call her all the names I want to, try to hurt her like she's hurt me. Never get to kick the shit out of her lover. Never get to ask why, really why, not this. I held up the letter, this pile of bullshit fucking justifications. An echo of a memory, once cherished and now tainted, came to mind. I mumbled, "No place to go." With a shake of my head, my gaze went back to Marcus. There was something that Lynn told me when I was trying to get through my father's death. Something I told my kids to help them get through hers. Grief is love with no place to go. He nodded. I've heard it before. I can see how it would be comforting. My voice was rough with pain and anger. Yeah. But here's the thing. I couldn't keep a snarl off my face, not one directed at him, but instead meant for the ghost in the room. What's hate with no place to go? Can you answer that for me? It was his turn to drink now. I don't know. He chuckled. Lawyers use words to create precision, not to illuminate truth. If you're looking for a poet, I'm afraid I'll have to step aside. He tilted his head to one side. But, if I had to guess? Rage. I raised my drink in salute. It's not a bad answer. Maybe. I'll think about it. A gulp finished the scotch in my glass. He held up the bottle. I shook my head. This was a time to be clear. Thanks, but no. It's a good scotch. Lynn pay for that out of her slush fund? His teeth were brilliantly white in the shadow. No, she paid for a much less expensive bottle. But this? He shook his head. This seemed like the type of thing that demanded a quality drink. This bottle's from my own collection. Well, thank you. It's nice to see someone's looking out for my best interests. Marcus softly said, she was, too, you know. At the end, I mean. I didn't spend much time with her, but I've spent a lot of time around cheating spouses, both in my job and... He looked sadly down at his left hand. And, well, otherwise. He smiled at me again, sadly this time, real emotion in his voice and face. Not the reserved but understanding lawyer, but a person with a past. You get a feeling for the ones that are contrite and for the ones that are faking contrition. Lynn, whatever else I can say, was sorry for what she'd done. For what she'd have to do to you by disclosing it. Yeah, well, that and a couple bucks will get you a coffee. I shook my head. We're getting off track. I can have a pity party on my own time. With a tap of my fingers on the table, I continued our planning session. Fine, I agree, there's no point in telling my kids their mom was a cheating slut. But I still need to get them tested. I can set that up for you. Concierge doctor, very private. HIPAA will be the least restrictive covenant placed on him. The question then is, do you only want a health screening, or do you want to know if you're their biological father as well? Fuck, I don't know. I stood and looked out the window. If I find out that one of them is vulnerable in a way that would require both parents to have the gene, then that tells me what I need to know, doesn't it? No, unfortunately. Your wife only had it as a recessive trait. We don't know, and only suspect, that Jeremy had it as a dominant trait. We don't know if you have it as either recessive or dominant. In order to know, you'd need to go through the health screening for you as well. There's no reason not to do that, but even that won't necessarily give you a definitive answer. It was quiet outside. Still, in the way a suburb on a school day afternoon can be. I remembered my kids playing on the swing that had hung from the tree in our front yard, that was gone now, victim of the kids all trying to climb on together. I smiled at the memory. Wanted to cry at the notion of. I'm not sure I want one. Marcus sighed behind me in the gloom. I understand. Ultimately, it's your decision. But I think you need to know. I turned slightly to look at him. Why? I don't know you well, Kurt. This conversation, some information from Lynn. I don't know if you're the type of man that can stand having knowledge available but just out of reach. For me, well, the curiosity would kill me. But more importantly, you need to know for your kids. I thought we'd just agreed that the kids don't ever need to know. Marcus inclined his head. Don't need to? Yes. Could possibly find out by accident? That's another matter. Your oldest is 18. What if she decides, as, I don't know, a celebration of Lynn's life to buy the whole family one of those genealogy site DNA kits at Christmas? She never met your parents or Lynn's mom. It's certainly the type of thing someone might do. And if she does that, then... He trailed off, letting me reach my own conclusion. Then a few weeks later, she finds out that she has a bunch of familial connections that Matt doesn't. Or Paula. And then the questions start. And then. Fuck. My head was throbbing. Well, thanks, Lynn. Yet another heartbreak you've left for me. I can't even have the choice between knowing or not knowing. I waved my hand in Marcus's general direction. Fine. Get tests for all of us. Health screens and the other. We'll just tell the kids we're testing for the abnormality. And then if I find out, I guess I'll. I don't know. Figure it out once I know one way or the other. He stood. Then I believe that's all we can do for the day. Think, when you can, what you might like to see done with the money. I know you're angry at her, but consider what it could do for your children. I would tell you to try to put these matters out of your mind, but I know that's an impossible task. Instead, try to focus on your children. They need you now, more than ever, and perhaps you can find strength and service to them. We walked to the front door, leaving behind the dining room table, the ritual objects, and the letter that destroyed the happy illusion of my marriage. Once there, he clasped me on the shoulder, an oddly intimate gesture for a man I barely knew. A welcome one, too. The human contact almost broke me. Kurt, I will be honest, I thought that this would go very differently. I don't know how you were able to take all of this without crumbling or throwing me out of your house. I don't think I could have. I have no doubt that you can get through this. I nodded, then spoke with a tremor in my voice. Thanks. He hesitated. Do you need me to stay a while longer? I'd be happy to. My head shook violently. No. I need to have some time to myself to try to process at least a little before I get the kids. I have to try to put my game face on for them. Marcus nodded, sympathetic. I'll let you know when the doctor will come to take the samples. I'll have him send me the results so that there's no chance of your children intercepting them. We can meet at my office once they're in to talk about next steps for both your family and the money. We said our goodbyes, and he left. I slid down the door once his car was gone, relinquishing control of my body and my emotions now that I was alone. My sobs echoed throughout the empty house, sobs that sounded like the mournful cries of a child rather than a man. I had lost my wife once, a month before. Now I had lost her again, and the second loss was far worse than the first. I stayed there, almost catatonic, until the alarm went off on my phone, telling me it was time to get the kids. I cleaned up both myself and the house as fast as I could, then drove along, trying to put a brave face on. They could see I had been crying, but I waved it away. They thought I was just mourning their mother and trying to be strong for them. They were right, but also so wrong. My mask slipped a few times that week. Venom came into my voice as I spoke of their mother occasionally. Jenny caught me starting with hatred at Lynn's wedding. Photo. Of all of the kids, I think she suspected that I wasn't simply mourning her mother's death. But she let it go. We all grieve in our own ways, and I think she wanted to believe my anger was simply that of a father left alone to raise his children alone, an irrational anger that would pass. I would do my best to maintain that illusion for her. The doctor came and went. I explained to the kids that we were testing them for health reasons, to see if they had the same gene as their mother. They mostly just shrugged their shoulders and went along with it. It was foolish, but I know that I held my breath for just a moment when Matt and Paula were swabbed. The results were back a few days later, and Marcus returned to my home with 4 new objects that would determine my fate, for sealed envelopes that contained our results. The bottle and tumblers were out again, but this time we didn't know if the news was good or ill. Still, a small drink ahead to steady my nerves seemed appropriate. We talked a little bit about nothing before the main event. I was stalling. I knew it, and he did, too, but he didn't push. Finally, feeling foolish, I tore open the first envelope, the one that contained my results. I was clean, with no sign of the genetic abnormality that Lynn suffered from. Jenny was next. Her envelope was opened with similar speed. I had already known that she might be at risk, and if Lynn had lied to me about when she had started cheating, or if she'd taken more than one lover, I'd rather find out quickly than not. Jennifer was my daughter in every way. I let out a breath I hadn't known I was holding. But then I saw the other result, that she shared the recessive version of the abnormality with her mother. She would need to have more frequent cancer screenings for the rest of her life, a small price to pay for more of it, though. My hand hovered over Matt's envelope, but I shifted to Paula's. Cowardly, perhaps, but he was my only son. Finding that either of my children weren't biologically mine would be devastating, but that would somehow hurt just a little worse. Sexist and patriarchal? Yes. But we feel how we feel. When I opened it, I found that my baby girl was mine, and that she, like me, was free of the taint that had taken her mother's life. I wavered. I almost asked Marcus to open it, but I couldn't. Wouldn't. This was my life, and my son's, and I would face the truth head-on. I ripped open the paper and scanned the results therein. My eyes flooded with tears, and I began to sob. Marcus spoke. "Kurt, I'm sorry." "He." My voice croaked, "Mine. Mine, he's mine." Any more words were lost in the emotion that I couldn't control. He was mine, and he was untouched by the abnormality. My children were mine in every way, not just by right of my having raised them, but by right of blood. There might be those who thought that foolish and old-fashioned, that it wouldn't matter if they shared my DNA or not. In some sense, they were right. But it wasn't the DNA I cared about. It was that my love for them was completely free of the corruption of their mother's lies. She had let me believe they were mine without knowing for sure. And now I knew. Irrational in a different way, but somehow the most important thing in the world to me at that moment. Marcus waited for me to collect myself, sat and sipped his scotch while I went to the guest bath and washed my face. When I returned, he said, "Have you decided what to do with the money?" "I don't want it." He raised an eyebrow. "Don't want the money, or don't want to accept it because of where it comes from?" "Don't be pedantic." Marcus smiled broadly. "I'm a lawyer. That's my job." He shook his head. "I understand that you might not want the money yourself. It feels tainted. But what about for your children? For college, or as a nest egg starting out? I could have it put in trusts for each of them, and we could tell them that it came from a life insurance policy. They would never have to know. I'd know. And look, even if I did that, it's money. It's fungible. That's the whole point of money." He chuckled. "If I use it to pay for their college, I'm not paying for their college. My money goes towards something else. In a roundabout way, I've still received his money. If I give it to them in trust as a nest egg, I'm not giving them that nest egg, so I am using his money in place of mine." He cocked his head. "Maybe. But I think you're looking at it wrong." A grin spread across his face. "I'm afraid this will require more pedantry, but perhaps you'll have a better appreciation for us shysters when I'm through." I winced as I remembered how I'd shouted at him in our first meeting. His manner changed, the seasoned orator coming out to play. There used to be suits that were called alienation of affection suits. There still are in some states, although this isn't one of them. They were intended to punish the affair partner, a way for a husband or wife to receive damages from the person that seduced their spouse. They've fallen out of fashion for a number of reasons. No-fault divorces are the norm these days, and the suits were simply never that effective in the first place. If the person had enough money to make the suit worthwhile, they had ways to hide the money. They were hard to prove. Overall, they just weren't worth pursuing. But we still have all sorts of other ways to take money away from people for their misdeeds. Pain and suffering, emotional distress, a variety of reasons. Now, even if Jeremy were still alive, you'd never be able to sue him and get the money from him. If Lynn were alive and you had divorced her, you likely wouldn't have gotten near what you should have out of this account. It might not have even showed up during discovery. But it's here now. You have access to it. You need to stop thinking of it as though it were a gift from Jeremy to your wife and instead see what it can be to you, a settlement. It's a payout from a suit that you never had to lodge and never could have won. You hate her? Fine, she's dead and her treachery has been exposed to you. You hate him? Fine, he's dead, he really was the last scion of his line, and you can take his money and do whatever you want with it, up to and including living the idle rich lifestyle that he hated. They hurt you, both of them. With their selfishness and their deceit, with Lynn's cowardly post-deathbed confession that prevented you from venting your spleen at her. I am with you on all of that. Where we part ways is this: the money, as you say, is fungible. It's out there. It's going to go to a charity, or it's going to sit and accrue interest, or it's going to eventually get stolen by some very clever kid in Eastern Europe with a laptop and a dream. Or, it can give you and your kids a better life. I growled, I'll know where it came from. Good. Then every time you use it, you can imagine you're pissing on their graves. They were selfish. You're allowed to be selfish, too. Your wife has heaped so much more on your shoulders than any husband should ever have to deal with: her infidelity, the fear that you were cuckolded, the fear that your children could die early, having to hide what she's done from your kids, all of it. He shook his head. I liked Lynn, for the time I knew her. I do believe she was sorry for what she'd done. But sometimes sorry isn't enough. She hurt you. They both did. Don't hurt yourself further to spite two dead people. Take the money, Kurt. Give some of it to your kids, tell them it's from investments you've made. Cash out of your company, or invest it into your company if that's what you'd prefer. But leaving it on the table? No. That might feel principled, but it's not. You're not taking a bribe. You're getting your own back. I snarled, incensed at the notion that any amount of dirty money could even begin to help me cope with this pain. Is that what you did in your own divorce? Get your own back? His face fell and his body sagged. No. I opened my mouth, but he softly said, no. I cheated, Kurt. I was the one that deserved my comeuppance. He turned his face away. Lynn wanted someone who had cheated to be here for you. Someone who had destroyed the ones that he loved for his own selfishness. I cheated on a faithful spouse for years with a younger woman, because I could. Because I felt it was owed to me, as a man, a successful man. The disgust he felt was almost palpable. Man, I was a callow boy. Stupid and self-centered. I had everything He poured himself another drink and drained it within seconds. Sheila found out. The affair was over, but she found out because of some little slip-up. She wouldn't say what. It doesn't matter. She found out, and the whole thing unraveled: my marriage, my relationship with my kids, my friendships, everything that really mattered in my life. I wanted to try to make amends, and she wouldn't accept anything from me, wouldn't even try to work with me to. He shook his head. There was nothing I could do for her. She divorced me. Took everything. I gave her more than she asked for. Not so that she'd forgive me, I knew that was not something she'd ever do. But so that maybe she could get past it. But she didn't. It ate her alive, the anger. She raged for the last year of her life at the indignity of it, the unfairness. She had every right to feel that way. But it killed her. I killed her. Her heart gave out. I killed the love of my life with my selfishness. He stared down into the empty glass. My kids, it's been 10 years, and they've just started talking to me again. That they let me in their lives at all, I'm so grateful. I just got to meet my 5-year-old grandson last month. I missed all of that. Marcus shook his head again, trying to clear it. The lawyer mask went back on, but it hung off kilter, unable to completely hide the pain. Kurt, take the money or don't. I think you should. You're not forgiving either of them by doing that. There's no court in the world that would require a plaintiff to forgive the party that wronged them as part of accepting a judgment. But even if you don't take the money, you have to find a way to not hate. Eventually. He looked at me, eyes moist. I gave a lot of thought to what you asked last week. What's hate with no place to go? And I thought rage, but that's just a point along the journey, like the 5 stages of grief. When hate reaches the end of that path, when it really has no place to go, it ends in death. Hate with no place to go is death. It will kill you. Maybe not your body, like he sniffed and his voice cracked. Like my poor Sheila. But it'll kill your soul. Turn you into a person that can only mark the time until they're passing, alone even with others. He looked up at the ceiling. It killed my Sheila. It's killing me now, the hate. I hate myself. Lynn hated herself, too, at the end. I envied her, envied that she would get to stop living with it soon. Because I haven't been able to let go of it. For 10 years, I haven't been able to. But I finally, my little grandson, I can feel the hate of myself starting to die away. Just a little. I can only pray to God that it's soon enough to save me. His face turned to me again, tears streaking it. Don't be me, Kurt. Or Sheila. Find a way to let the hate go. Epilogue, 10 years later. Hey Lynn. I smoothed a bit of dirt off of her gravestone. No one had visited in some time. The kids had moved out of state, Jenny was married with 2 children of her own, and Matt was expecting his first. Paula was trying to figure out her place in the world. I had to believe that she'd get there eventually. I put the flowers down on my former wife's grave. Lilies. Her favorite. I know that I haven't visited. I won't apologize, I don't owe you anything. Our ledger will never be balanced. But I needed to talk to you one last time. The cold air made me more alert, but also uncomfortable. There were aches and pains at 54 that hadn't been there a decade previous, and the cold made some of them worse. It didn't matter. This wouldn't take long. I hated you for a long time. I loved you, too, a little bit. Still do. You were, for your many faults, a good mother. After your affair, you were even a good partner, in your way. The lies were. I sighed. It doesn't matter. I tried to kill the love I had for you, tried to drown it in hate and anger. But I never did entirely. I guess I never will. I looked at the gray sky. It would snow again soon. I needed to thank you for one final thing. Not the money. Marcus finally did convince me that I was owed that for what you'd put me through. It wasn't any kind of gift. It wasn't even a bribe. It was reparations for what you'd done. No, it was for Marcus. You saved my life when you picked him. He convinced me to let go of my hatred of you. It took a long time, and, like the love, there's still a seed of it at the core of my heart. But if it hadn't been for him, I think your betrayal would have killed me. So thank you for your choice there. It did save my life. I nodded to myself. There was nothing left to say. I walked a few rows down and a few further back, then sat on the ground and opened up a leather satchel. Hey Marcus. It's been a while. After pulling out 2 tumblers and a bottle of scotch, I poured each of us and saluted his marker. I'm sorry I haven't been by before. I only heard about your passing through a mutual friend. I would have come to the service if we'd stayed in touch. The whiskey burned a little going down. I'm sorry about that, too. I wish we could have been friends. You got me through the darkest time in my life. But, hell, it was you that realized it. Being around you, I was always going to be reminded of Lynn and what she'd done. I chuckled. Just another thing she's fucked up in my life. I patted his marker. Thank you, Marcus. You should have been my friend. I'm sorry that didn't happen. But you saved my life. I can never thank you enough for that. I talked to your son, and I'm glad you were able to find your way back, too. I finished my drink and left both tumblers on the stone. Once I'd stood, I opened the bottle and poured the contents onto his grave, a woefully inadequate tribute to a great, flawed man that I'd never be able to thank enough. Once back in my car, I called home. Hey hon, yeah, I'm done here. You feel like going out tonight? I kind of want to celebrate. Celebrate what? Take your pick. I'm gonna go with the gorgeous dame that I married. Yeah, okay. I love you, Deb. Be there soon.